Hi, welcome back. This is Stephen Howard with discussions on great leadership. And my guest today is Rob Pianka. And Rob has this great philosophy that I really want to talk about helping people become globally agile or culturally competent in our globalized world. And he's got a little formula. If you go to his LinkedIn page, he's got this great little formula for success in a globalized world, which he says is hard and creative skills plus emotional intelligence plus global agility times your global disc, which I presume means understanding yourself. So Rob's been a consultant for many, many years, almost a couple decades, and let's talk to Rob. So welcome back, or welcome to the show, Rob.
Hi, thanks for having me, Stephen.
Oh, my pleasure. And everyone gets the very first question, and that is simply, what does great leadership mean to you?
I thought about that, and I'm allergic to greatness.
Okay.
In the end, I'm not, right? But I'm using that to throw out a lot of garbage. For 4,000 years, we wrote a history of ourselves based on kings and great figures, military figures. And the people didn't play in that narrative. And we live in an era where people are, for me at least, front and center. And greatness, if it's not something that's achievable by you and me, right, probably doing more harm than good. So leadership that's on a human level, I find that that would be great.
So should we call it humanistic leadership?
Personal and interpersonal. We can deal with an small number of people, right? How many? 12, 15, 20 in that group that you're going to have direct relationships with.
Right.
And so it's on that level. If leadership is on that level, right, I'm all for it.
Okay. All right. Well, do you think leadership can be found at every level of an organization, or is it only at the top?
Oh, if it's not at every level, what does it matter if it's at the top?
Exactly. There may not be an organization to speak of. It's a collection.
Yeah. I've done a lot of work in conflict zones and hard places under embargoes and dictatorships, and leadership at the top with none of it underneath. Not interested.
Nothing gets done, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, part of my philosophy is that mid-level leaders are the glue between strategy and execution. So like glue, it has to bound to both sides. Mid-level leaders need to bound to the strategy, but also as well to the execution. So I'm totally in line with you there.
In today's age, I mean, if you want to talk about a company and you look at the global supply chain that it's working with, the diversity in the company, the cultural complexity of the channels to market and of their customers, the end users themselves, all those people are touched by everybody in the company. Hardly any of them ever get to talk to the CEO, right? But the purchasing department, the logistics people, the marketing people, and all that, they're where the handshake with all that brings that whole world together, that whole global phenomena together. So yeah, leadership on that level.
Excellent. So talk to us about globally agile. What do you mean by that? And then what do you mean by culturally competent?
If you look at, if you accept that the world is globalized, even though we don't use it as much as it can, the architecture is already built. The questions of diversity that we face, just multiply that. I call it diversity squared, right? Okay. We are in a situation where people need to be able to bond quickly with people from any culture. You don't get to choose who shows up on the Zoom meeting, right? So traditional cultural competence training would say I'm going to deal with Mexican supplier now, so I'm going to study a bit about Mexican culture. Well, you can't study all the cultures. So what are the skills that you could work on that would help you be confident and comfortable in the awkward cross-cultural moment, and basically create or start a relationship with a person from any culture, right? That's not knowing about them and their culture. That's knowing more about yourself and how to, what levels that you have, what aspects you have in your identity that you can use to bond with another person. There's a funny thing where two people meet and they act like they're representatives of their own country. So you have like a mini UN meeting where I say we and I mean Americans, and they say we and they mean French, and we talk about Lebanon or something like that, as if we're the ambassadors or the presidents. We're not, right? At a certain point in time, you realize that you're both dads of, say, a 30-year-old kid. Like my son's 33, right? Now that's a level, that's an aspect that your conversation is going to be more grounded on. There's less reason to be separated by politics, for instance, more reason to be together by the perspective of having that experience, that shared experience. So, but global agility is that ability to bond. The global disc is, where do you go with that? Now that you've started a relationship and it didn't get blown out of the water, in the first 2 minutes, which often happens, right? Where do you go with that? How do you continue to communicate in a cross-cultural manner that is required?
Well, unfortunately, we've all had a unifying experience for the last 15, 16 months called COVID-19. So is there a silver lining come out of the pandemic that maybe we will learn more about each other?
Yeah, and I often get in trouble for talking about the good things about COVID because it's been a horrible experience, not only because of all the deaths, but because of the many ways that we've mishandled a collective threat. But yeah, it's accelerated our movement into that architecture, which was already built. The post-World War II, the post-World War II world that we're living in right now, the architecture was laid down in 1948, et cetera. And it's fully built. I can have as much interchange and productive collaboration with a person, pick a country today, as with somebody in my own town. Matter of fact, it's a little bit easier, right? And we're still sitting there like, in movies about prisoners, they get released after 20 years and they go to the halfway house and they're standing in the hallway and they can't open the door to their room because they're not allowed to open doors in the 20 years of prison, right? We're kind of like that. We've built this world that is global and immediate, and there's no distance, but we're still acting like we're separated by something. Right. Well, that separation, the separating things are gone.
How would you apply this, your thinking, say, to people who don't deal internationally? I mean, both you and I have long international business experiences in history, but for the people in the audience who really deal, say, within their total domestic audience, whether they're Australians dealing with Australians or Americans dealing with Americans, Canadians dealing with Americans, and how can you apply these same set of skills to be a better leader coming out of the pandemic that you're talking about?
Intercultural is a lot more immediate than international, right? So you do have a diversity of cultures within your own national territory you have to deal with, and you have now the diversity squared of cultures that come across that border in your life, and they're stakeholders in your life, right? And to take it from the stick side, right? If your job got outsourced, or the entire sector that you had your career was based on got outsourced in the last 30 years, which happened to a lot of blue collar workers and agriculture workers in the States, right? You've met globalization face to face, and it matters. With the new technologies advancing for just this type of meeting. And in the future, it's going to be holograms, right? The white collar world is going to go the same way. It's going to be swept the same way. Right now, I give something to my accountant. They give it back to me the next day because it's worked on in Mumbai. Right. Well, you decided you wanted to be an accountant. Well, there are not that many positions left unless you want to go to Mumbai and work for less. So yeah, it matters. That's the push side. That's the stick side. 70% of the pricing in the United States domestic market, it goes up or down based on a mixture of domestic and international factors. If you're growing a crop of corn in Iowa, right, you better know what they're doing with corn, in China, etc. It just goes on down the line. You can't live in a globally intertwined economy and think that you can live in a globally isolated society or have an isolated life. It's not going to happen. That's changed, right? Now, the good side is that's fantastic. A small amount of pivoting, a little bit of global agility, right? You can go from black to white to color, right? You open the, like a TV, you open up a door, there's somebody on the other side of it. They're happy to see you. You have good relationships. I built a little business a while back with my brother. He lives in Cambodia, and he gentleman farmed. He bought himself a camp pot pepper plantation. He sold it after a couple of years, but I was the importer into the States. There might have been 20 people involved in the business. The people that I was selling to, myself, the service people who were helping me get it here, my brother and his wife, a French foreman who worked on the farm, the pepper master, a Cambodian, spoke no English whatsoever, right, or French, and had he was the fourth generation camp pot pepper master in that family, and then all the labor that came from the village. That small chain of people was a global business.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like a fair trade business because, I like fair trade, and everybody participated in it. And I did it at the same desk that I'm speaking to you from now. And if you don't have relationships with the stakeholders in your lives who come from across the border, you're going to get blindsided. I mean, you pick a career, right? You're 10 years into it. You want to be a VP. Your company gets bought. A lot of these companies aren't American companies anymore, right? You might not even know it. Now your career goes through, say, a layer of management in Munich, right? Well, what are you going to do about that? You want to be the VP, right? You better become the most favored American employee of those people sitting in Munich. And you don't know when it's going to matter, but when it does, there are fundamental things at stake here, particularly prosperity. We haven't had a rise in per capita income in the United States since 1973, since the oil embargo. That is a long time for traditional American dream history, the mechanics of the American dream, right? Which is you can work hard and be a little bit better off than your parents, and you can put your children in a place where they can get better. It's a long time for that escalator to be broken. Well, it's not going to get broken by becoming North Korea and becoming autarkical in our philosophy. It's going to be broken by actually following through on the architecture that we built. It's kind of like we're hit by a boomerang, and we're wondering who threw it. Who threw it? We threw it.
We threw it.
Yeah, we created the free trade environment. And the internet, and it behooves us to get behind our own ball, to be on our own team. You don't get to change that now. We've revolutionized so many people's lives, right? We were content when other cultures had to change, and they had to be globally agile to survive, being in the same cage as the elephant when he, shifted his weight. And now it's coming through us. We are undergoing the same kind of change that we've been content to watch other more traditional cultures go through. And a lot of work in economic development or in humanitarian assistance involves traditional cultures, being dragged kicking and screaming into modernity. Well, there's a lot of kicking and screaming going on. We are like refugees and internally displaced persons. And That's where I had a half career doing humanitarian assistance work, and then for-profit business development work, and I bounced between the two. I was in Beirut 3 summers ago, remote managing a humanitarian assistance project in Syria. I had been hired to take it over as they search for a permanent replacement. So I spent the summer doing this in Beirut. It struck me that refugees, they don't know, they miss who they were a week ago, right? You could have owned a shoe factory and now you're standing there with one pair of shoes. They're not really comfortable with what people are telling them, who you are now. You're a refugee, you don't have a home, we don't know what's going to happen to you. And they're not really comfortable with ideas about where they should go, right? Like you can wait in the camps for 75 years, or you can go to Toronto, or you can, try to get into the States, whatever it is. This whole thing about who you are is extremely, it's a concentrated critical phenomena in refugee communities. I come back to the States, it's not the same degree of change, but the fact that the environment has changed so much that the previously sound and stable domestic economy and society and culture is now in a overall environment that is radically different and extremely powerful. There are a lot of change being driven. You can't talk to people about their identity if they're happy and content. It's an insult. But if they're in the refugee circumstance, it's a necessity. How do you stabilize yourself psychologically and socially and get your family through this period of time until you can restabilize, grow roots again, put your children in a stable circumstance where they can grow up and become something. How do you do that? And when you work with refugees, one of the first things you do is try to assure them humans have the resilience, to deal with this kind of thing. You come back to the States, people are acting like internally displaced people. There's a lot of who are we and what are we going to become? And for a globally deployed military superpower, the idea that you don't know who you are and what you want in the world, that's pretty dangerous.
Oh, there's no question about it, serious. And one of the things that made the U.S. economy so stable for many years was a stable workforce. Mm-hmm. But now coming out of the pandemic, every research I read shows 40 to 60% of employees thinking about changing jobs, particularly if they're forced to go back to work. People now, questioning who am I? Well, I'm not a person who works 80 hours a week. That's not my future self. I don't want to be a person who works 80 hours a week. So we're going to see a lot more stability coming out of the pandemic, just in people deciding to switch jobs. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. The thing is, where do you find solid footing? Right. That's an interesting question. And great leadership would lead people to solid footing and a future vision. I don't think we've had that since the fall of the wall. Jean Le Carré said, I paraphrase him, the wall fell and we went to lunch, right? The vacuum, Ronald Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. There's been no sentence after that. We kept the tariff walls up for 15 years. At a time where the fledgling countries falling out of the Soviet Union could have been selling us pig iron, that was prevented by the tariff wall that had separated the two worlds. We needed some sentences then. The vacuum that was created explains Putin more than anything else. And, we have an unhappy global relationship. There's a lot of instability in the larger picture. Great leadership would have been dealing with that. But from a global agility point of view, you can't do anything about the big picture. The technologies that drive globalization are a fact, and you can't put them back in the box. It's a Pandora's box. The fact that the global system hasn't accommodated the internet and electronic sales, internet sales yet, means there's a lot of work to be done, and we can't do that. The opinions that people have about globalization and anti-globalization are opinions, and when they meet the fact of globalization, they don't really matter, right? And so there's a lot of toxic discussion going along about this, but it's not helpful. The only thing you can do anything about is your personal ability to survive and thrive in that environment. So if we take leadership and we bring it down to this level where we're talking about you and me and 10 other people, there's an extraordinarily good thing at that level. In mass society, and Václav Havel, a great leader, pointed out that in this respect, there's not much difference between the Soviet world and the West. In a mass society, right, with mass media, the solidarity of people can be pulverized out. And if you pulverize that out, if you don't have 12 people in your life who can say BS when you're self-interestedly lying to them, what do you have? I mean, what defense do we have against, as a society, as people, against these major forces that are influencing our lives? Just think of how many advertisements you're going to hear and how many political advertisements you're going to hear today. And what's the wall that's protecting you? Who's you got 1,000 friends on Facebook, and you can say anything and nobody calls you on it. Global agility is a personal matter of relating to other people, and you build a network of people who want to trust you and you want to trust them. So whether or not there's something underneath fact and truth, you make the compact that you're going to hold each other to something like that. And in fact, there are things underneath, there are real values and real immutable truths, that type of stuff. But in our modern society, we would be, blessed if all of us would just go out for the next 6 months and accumulate a small network of people from different countries and different, cultures, particularly ones where you're crossing a cultural divide, whether it's diversity or diversity squared, have a serious discussion about our lives, right? Because if we do that, if we can strengthen the fabric and of the life of citizens, they will be in a better position to create civil societies that can advocate for the things that really matter to me, and I hope to other people: truth, prosperity, raising babies well, enjoying life, enjoying each other as people. If you look at that and say the economy as a GDP is a little less important than it was before COVID. Right now, we're going to do an economy based on Bhutan's happiness index. Now we're going to look for balance. Maybe there is enough work to go around. Maybe there is enough pay to go around. We're not all going to be able to live the same way. Well, how are we going to live? That's a wonderful question. I've lived under embargoes before where there is no pulse to the economy. It's not a bad thing necessarily. There's some really good aspects to it. The devotion of people to each other, the time they spend with each other. There's less self-interest in people's minds because, they can't pursue their self-interest effectively. So they start to pursue other people's, interests. It's not a bad thing. And the balance is what we're looking for. And this could be the future, so there's it's like a vision of a future that we need to go for. And great leadership got to help us, get there.
I think, Rob, that's what a lot of people are thinking about, and coming out of this, and as I said earlier, people reevaluating what's important, and I would advocate it's not even work-life balance; it's work-life harmony. How can I harmonize my life better?
Mm-hmm.
Last kind of a big picture question for you from a societal standpoint. Well, I'll tell you what I think first. It used to be, I would say, back in the 50s and 60s, right after the World War II, the best and the brightest went into government. Now, I would argue that the best and the brightest in the United States have not gone into the government probably since the Kennedy administration. They've gone to Wall Street. They've gone to big businesses. Now they've gone to Silicon Valley. First of all, do you agree with that? And then secondly, if you do, how can we get the best and the brightest back into government?
We do live in a democratic age compared to other ones. We still have a great deal of power equivalent to an old aristocracy, but it also has to, have a relationship with the people. People have an expectation and they have ways of securing, their interests. We live in this democratic era, and in democratic eras, you get the government you deserve.
For better or for worse.
Yeah. And we look at our government and we fault it for things. And it's a miserable place to be. If you have a good idea, you can't really announce it in public because some other political player will knock it out of your hands because the public doesn't comprehend the circumstance it's in. There are easy answers to almost every pressing question. There's almost an impossibility of talking to the voting publics in the democracies about them. And I think the people who would want to do that have left the building, and the people who know how to manipulate, for better or for worse, but their job is to manipulate, to stay in power, in the circus, throw bread at the public in the forum. There's a lot of that going on. It's not finished yet. I mean, you could easily reverse that. We have amazing people, and great leadership hiding in the background for when we deserve it. And that's one of the reasons I say global agility is the starting point, because unless you have a citizenry that is capable of entertaining a good policy idea, they're not going to be said, they're not going to hear them. People aren't going to say those ideas to them. But those ideas are out there. The American public becomes better integrated in the world as it is and gives up the fantasies and just moves forward a little bit. And we're not asking people to do something that's impossible. The level of global agility around the world is tremendous. If you come from a small country, you're globally agile. If you come from the EU, you got to do it with 26 other countries every day of your life from kindergarten up. Lebanon, they got, at least 16 factions in Beirut, and you can't trick them into a civil war anymore. They were able to become globally agile as a broken puzzle of people who will at least hang on to peace, domestic peace. Which is a major achievement. Global agility is a human quality. Children have it. We kind of didn't exercise it because of our geographic and financial and economic isolation. But there is no geographic isolation. The finances are world finances. Companies are transnational companies. The entire landscape. The only people left sitting inside countries trying to advance their interests without going outside, without using outside factors, are the people. Anybody else, the companies, CEOs, the wealthy, the institutions, all that type of stuff, they all operate transnationally now. The last people left is us. I'm sorry, we're quite capable. I mean, look at American traditions. You want great leadership? Look back to the Clipper era, big, tall sailing ships, Americans trading all across the world, underneath the empires with an anti-imperial attitude. It's when we first began our policy of trying to help China become free from foreign domination and to prosper. Now, I'm sorry, there's a lot of people who are upset that China lifted 250 billion people out of poverty in the last 20 years, right, and has become an economic power and all that type of stuff. But hey, this is what we wanted, and it's a great trading partner. If you put the two economies together, it's a fantastic system. Now, how do you balance people's interests in that? Well, the only people who aren't at the table advocating their interests with serious effectiveness is you and me, the people. But we're quite capable of this. There's nothing separating us from a greater control over what happens in our lifetimes economically and just for satisfaction of living, besides this little question of global agility.
There you have it, folks. Get yourself a network. 10, 12 people, multicultural, transnational, start to understand how the world is interconnected, and you'll start to build yourself a better business, and you'll start to lead your people to a better future. Is that a good summation, Rob?
Yeah, I wish I could have said that. You would have saved us all this time. Thank you. I'm going to write that down.
I'll send you a copy of the recording.
I'm going to quote that now.
There you go. Well, Rob, thank you very much. We could go on, but I try and keep this under 20 minutes because I know people's time's valuable, and I also know YouTube things that are too long, people just tune out. So we'll have to do this again and talk about it, maybe boil it down and work on some real tactical things that people should be thinking about. But thank you for that. Thank you for that big picture overview. I really appreciate it. I think our audience will appreciate it. So thank you very much. This has been Stephen Howard with discussions on great leadership. And man, have we had a discussion today. Big picture, great leadership, global big picture, great leadership. Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much.
Thank you.